I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition. It is February 4th, 2014. It is the Tuesday edition of DTRH. And tonight, I'm going to be spending the next 2 hours talking about the subject of gun control. And of course, you could probably hear snoring dog in the background there. She'll be hanging out with me too. Talking about gun control and the Port Arthur Massacre. Now, many Americans, like myself, do not know much about the Port Arthur Massacre. People are going to go, Popeye, what's that? I don't even know what that is. It was an incident which led to the draconian gun legislation and current conditions that you see in Australia today. And there's a lot of evidence to say that it was what the conspiracy theorists here, like myself, would call a false flag, and an event with a lot of weird things going on. And I honestly really did not know much about this. And there's I don't know many people that, I know I have a bunch of listeners in Australia, but I don't know really anybody who to call in Australia. And then I thought of my good friend Tempest, who you guys have heard on the broadcast before, and I've been on Hangar 18, and he's got his own show here over on Truth Frequency. And I'll have him plug his stuff in a second. And that's where he lives. And what better a person than him to have on for 2 hours to talk about the Port Arthur Massacre, the history behind what really happened, as opposed to the official story, talk about the gun control legislation over there. I mean, I could give you anecdotal evidence or evidence that I've researched myself. But I can't give you on the ground, I'm living it type of evidence or experience, whereas he can. So for tonight, for 2 hours, my good buddy Tempest, or as Joe likes to bust his balls and call him, T-Bone, poor Tempest, he's going to be on with me tonight. So before anything, Tempest, do me a favor. Plug your radio show, what time it's on, and any YouTube or Twitter and Facebook and anything else you want to throw out there.
All right. I'd like to say g'day to Popeye and everyone listening. Thanks for having me on the rabbit hole, Popeye. This is quite a great honour to be standing on the deck with you, Captain. I mean, this is quite amazing. But I'm on Thursday night. I think it's straight after you, Thursday night. So whatever time that is in your time zone. It's just me from now on. Craig's decided to go his own way. He's doing his own thing. And we're still good mates, so there's none of that kind of rubbish behind the scenes stuff. Sorry to disappoint everybody. But, tune in on Thursday night. I'm going to be doing a bit of a history lesson on colonial Australia and a few other different bits and pieces.
Oh, I really like your show, and I talk to you off air a lot about a lot of stuff. You know, you're a smart guy, ladies and gentlemen. You need to tune into his stuff. You need to listen to what Tempest has to say. He's not only is he enlightened, but if you're in America and you think that you're all alone and it's only America and blah 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 blah, and it's only this stuff's only happening to me. You'll see it's not only happening to you. You listen to him; he's from another country. He's from Australia. Bam! You see it's not only happening to you; it's happening over there as well. And what you see going on in one country, you could expect if it's not going on in your country just yet, it could be, and it possibly or most probably will be, because that's part of the same agenda. So it's good to get a different viewpoint. That's why I like listening to Kev Baker, too, over at Glasgow Underground News, because he's from Scotland. So you get the view from Scotland and the UK. It's the same thing. So,
absolutely love Kevin Kipp. I really do. I enjoy it. And it's a good thing that we're a worldwide network and we all get together here. We can see what's going on in our backyard and let other people know around the world that that's right, man, we're all in this together.
Well, case in point, look at the gun control laws and in legislation and stuff that you guys have over in Australia. When they first banned guns, they took away the rifles and they took away the pistols, and they said to you guys that, we won't come for the bolt actions, right? We're not going to come for the old-fashioned bolt action rifles. Ha, 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 that's old-fashioned technology. We would never come for that. And then wasn't it like a year ago? Now they're trying to come for the bolt-action rifles. So
yeah, absolutely, Paul. I mean, the similarities between even the terminology that they use in the media and the politicians like to use between Australia and the United States now is incredibly similar. And like you brought up Port Arthur in the opening of the show, and that was one that sticks out in the minds and the psyche of people in Australia. But there was a whole heap of events that led up to that. I mean, it goes back as far as 84 and probably even a bit before, but there was a bikie massacre, a big shootout with bikies back in 84 called the Father's Day Massacre in Milperra, and that sort of kicked it off. And then every few years they had this one lone gunman sort of thing happen at a regular interval. I mean, there was Westfield and Flinders Street Mall in Melbourne. There was two in Melbourne. After that, the politicians started getting together. We have a bit of a different system in Australia, as you might realise. And after I think it was I'm trying to scratch in my head right now. Oh, hang on, give us a second. Geez, where is it? Sorry about that. The Queen Street Massacre in Melbourne, that's right. There's just been too many of them to get it all straight. But all the premiers in this country...
So before Port Arthur, like in the years preceding Port Arthur, there were other shootings, kind of like what we've seen here in the States, like where there's mall shootings or, a movie theater shooting or whatnot here. Same kind of thing was going on over there?
Exactly the same thing. I mean, 7 people killed in about 3 or 4 different ones. Like, I mean, the number 7 just keeps popping up all the time. But, massive amounts of people being injured. But there was 2 in 87. There was one in Queen Street in Melbourne, and then there was another one in Melbourne in Hoddle Street the same year. I think they were separated by a couple of months, not very far apart at all. But after that, the premiers of the state, which is kind of like your state governors are in the United States, they all got together in Tasmania, and they tried to undercut the Australian Constitution and bring in a reform to all the gun laws in 87. 2 states backed out of it, and to bypass the Constitution of Australia, they needed to have complete solidarity. They need to have every state get on board to do that. And 2 states didn't, one being Tasmania, where Port Arthur is, and the other one being South Australia. And the funny thing about why I bring that up, the funny thing was in 87, the Premier of New South Wales was caught on mic, or it was a statement that he gave. It's a quote that a lot of people like to talk about. And he said, "We won't have uniform gun control in this country until there's a massacre in Tasmania." And that was 9 years before Port Arthur. I think that's just an interesting point.
So, was there a push behind the scenes for draconian gun control legislation like you see here before during these shootings? Like before any of them happened, before this rash of shootings started to pick up, in the years preceding and leading up to Port Arthur, was there any push for gun control legislation at all?
Well, it wasn't out there in the public. I mean, they do things a bit quieter in Australia because, well, I don't know, people don't sort of get up in your face like they might do in the States. A lot of the farmers got upset when they decided they were going to, the big gun buy back in '96. But there's always been like an anti-gun movement. There's always been a pro-gun movement. And politicians sort of don't like to talk about it too much because it hits them in the electoral ballot. You know what I mean? Like they try and banter to whoever's sort of getting the most support at one particular time. So what I think they've done...
Just like here. Okay.
Yeah. No, it is. It's exactly the same. That's why I like talking about it with people in the States that don't understand, because I saw how they did it here, and I'm watching what goes on over there, with Sandy Hook and Aurora and that latest one in Washington, D.C. at the Navy Yard. I mean, the similarities are amazing, and even down to the rhetoric that the media like to use. The weaponry used and the way that they portray these lone gunmen and why one guy can influence the rights of the many.
Just listening to some of the audio from the Port Arthur massacre, which I'm gonna play, or I should say, not from it, but from witnesses, like witness testimony following it. And you sent me some really just killer audio, and listening to the testimony of these people from what they experienced, and then the things that they experienced afterwards, and the official version differs so drastically, and it's just like you see here. Like when I saw the Aurora shooting was probably one of the first shootings here that somebody said to me, one of the listeners, because I tore it apart that day. It happened it happened on a Friday, and I went on air that night. I was going live anyway, and Steve Stars happened to be on with me, and he lives not too far from there. So he was giving me, on the ground, close up reporting, background information on the area and everything else, and it just stunk to high heaven. And one of the listeners emailed me and said, "You should look up Port Arthur." And I had heard of Port Arthur, but when you're doing so much stuff and you're doing so much research, there are certain things you might hear a name, but it gets put on the shelf. And I was like, Port Arthur, Port Arthur, Port Arthur. And I looked it up, and I was like, oh my God. As soon as I started even 5 minutes of research, reading just a little bit, I was like, oh my God, it's similar. It's so similar. And then knowing now, the background, like you said, there were things preceding it, and then Port Arthur happened, which we're going to get into in a second. And then you see what's going on over here. It's like watching it unfold a second time over.
That's really what it is. It's just like that. What was I going to say then? Sorry about this. I'm a little bit nervous because I'm on the jack. I'm sorry. I'll just gather my thoughts back together again.
No big deal.
Yeah, sorry, man.
No big deal, dude. Well, when the event itself happened, Port Arthur, not the other shootings, but when the event itself happened, was before that, were there people that were saying, "Hey, there's strangeness going on," or was the Port Arthur event the one that set everybody's flags off? Because, like you said earlier, there were two states that in Australia that wouldn't sign off on it, Tasmania being one of them. And Tasmania is not connected, right? It's off the mainland, right? It's like a little island.
It's a little island down the bottom. It's cut off from the rest of the authorities, and I suppose you like to call that like the federal authorities. But that's one of the funny things about it, is that the amount of stuff that they had there on standby, and we'll probably get into that later, but that's one of the big things that sticks out in my mind, that all this stuff was sort of ready to go after the event happened. And for the nature of it, just for the record too, for a long time it was a standing record in the world for the biggest mass shooting until that one in Norway, not too many years ago, which, like you said, you put things on the shelf, there's just so much going around. I've looked into that a little bit, but I haven't really researched it in depth either, the Norway shooting. But up until that point, it was the record in the world for the most amount of people killed in one place at one time. And I don't know if you were getting to whether people all of a sudden realised what was going on. A lot of people in this country today have no idea about what really happened in Port Arthur. They see what they see on the mainstream media, and that's the official story to them. And that's
so Port Arthur's like your 9/11.
Yeah, pretty much. It happened in '96 for me, and you first hear the story in the report on TV. It's like, oh, yep, someone's lost the plot. But then a couple of years later down the track, little bits and pieces start coming out, and then the witnesses started talking, and there's a lot more to it than what the mainstream were letting on, that's for sure.
Well, all right, so let's get into the Port Arthur massacre. Most people the listeners have probably ascertained that obviously Port Arthur was some sort of mass shooting. Port Arthur is what? It's a mall in Tasmania, a shopping...
No, actually Port Arthur is a historical site. It's an old convict settlement from the 1800s, and it's like a tourist attraction. And actually that day on the ground there was a busload of US senior citizens on a tour who were actually at the site when the gunman went off. So there you go, the small world keeps getting smaller.
So it's a huge like tourist attraction center, like this old port, and I'm sure there's shops and little kiosks and stuff around there. And
yeah, well, the main part of the shooting took place inside the cafe at Port Arthur, and that's where I think 20 of the victims were killed. And inside this one little eatery, that's where the woman that we're going to be listening to later on in the clip, that's where she was at the time the shooting started as well. Basically, I've never been there myself, but what I can understand is a lot of old ruins, and they do, like historical shows and that kind of thing. A bit like what I imagine Gettysburg must be like if you go there on a tour.
Well, if you're gonna pull off an event, that's the place to do it.
It's a bit strange, isn't it? It's so isolated too. I think it's not in a built-up area. So they can use it.
I didn't realize that either until when you hear Port Arthur massacre and you hear shops and stuff, like that's why I said to you, is it a shopping center? What is it? Because I was trying to make out what it was just from and again I didn't even realize that it had happened. For some reason I had, again, cafe, I had thought that it was outside of the area, but so it's actually inside the historical area where the cafe's in there, and this event happens at an area that I come to find out is secluded. It is far more secluded than you would one would think. Like we have our shootings here at a mall, you could run outside in the parking lot and the cops can come right up and they can respond within a few minutes. I mean, you listen to some of the testimony, and it took the cops like 2 hours to respond to this event. I mean, if you're going to stage an event, that's the place to do it, because you have all the time in the world. Just like you said, the one in what was it, Sweden or whatever, or Switzerland or whatever, though Norway. That's the one where they were all on the island. They couldn't get away. You can't. Where are you going to run? You're on an island. You can't run anywhere. Where are you going to go?
No, that's absolutely right. It was only an hour and a half from Hobart, which is the capital of Tasmania, where there is a lot of police and emergency services. And the phone call was made 15 minutes, I think, after the shooting began. And it still took them 4 hours to get anyone there. And then it was only one police officer, who wasn't armed. And this guy's still running around, or allegedly this one guy's still running around.
I don't understand. See, that's something that's really crazy to me when I was listening to some of the testimony that you sent me.
Yeah.
First of all, they sent out officers with no guns. Then there was, and like, they sent up to the first 5 officers on the scene had no firearms. Why would you send officers to an active shooting scene with no firearms? What are you going to bite the bullets out of the air? Or maybe they're like Neo and they can do bullet time and dodge the bullets.
That's absolutely astounding. I can't. There's a lot of this that just makes absolutely no sense. I mean, completely and utterly no sense whatsoever. One being that the response time was incredibly short.
How come nobody at Port Arthur was armed? Was there already like a ban on guns at the time or something, or were they not permitted on the property? Because if somebody had, I'm sure if there was one smart individual with a firearm and the knowledge of how to use it and at least one magazine, he could have perhaps put an end to this much sooner. Especially considering that the testimony was that this guy was, or supposedly the shooter was walking around executing people pretty much. Not in some cases taking his sweet time. So if sweet time in a situation like that, 2 or 3 seconds, believe me, it seems like a lifetime. But if you had a gun, or someone on the scene that had a gun, and with the knowledge of how to use it, carrying concealed whatever, they could have fought back. Why was nobody armed in Port Arthur?
Well, Australia's a little bit different. People don't carry their guns around in the car and that kind of stuff. They have them at home. If they use them for, hunting or whatever like that, they'll be locked up and people don't really carry them around. Plus the nature of the tourist destination itself, it's overseas visitors and families more than anything. So that, when the family goes out for a holiday, they don't usually think about packing up the Glock or bringing along the shotgun. So I can understand why there wasn't anyone with a weapon. Also, the management of the area, it's a privately owned facility, and all the management staff plus the owners were about, I think, 8 hours away, and they'd gone for an overnight seminar at 11 o'clock that morning, and the shooting began at 1. And that had never happened in the 18 years of Port Arthur being open, and it's never happened since. And there you get another one of those strange coincidences. So if he had weaponry there, being the manager, maybe he did. He wasn't even on site when it happened. And it was a Sunday afternoon too. I can sort of picture it, people out there just having a quiet time with the family.
Is he an executive, this guy? The guy that runs the place? Because, does he have some sort of security himself? Maybe that's.
I don't know. He was the CEO of the area of the company that owns Port Arthur, as far as I know.
It just doesn't make any sense that you'd have a huge place like that that's got a cafe, and it's I understand it's privately owned, but it's a landmark, right? A national landmark there for Australia, and yet you don't even have one guard keeping the peace, just making sure some teenage kid doesn't horse around and maybe go in the bushes and light a fire or something like. I mean, they have that at regular, national parks, even if you have a park ranger. So, not having any security that day while this lunatic could run around and kill people, that's a little questionable.
That is, actually. That's a good point. I mean, I've worked on resorts up here where there are security on the grounds at all time, and they mightn't be carrying arms with them, but they know where they are, if you know what I mean. So that's a really good point. I can't answer that one myself.
It just doesn't make any sense. I mean...
No. Well, it's just the beginning of the stuff that doesn't make sense. We've got a whole another hour and a half of this. It gets wilder and wilder. It really does.
It does. It really does. Again, I didn't know... I really didn't know half of this stuff until you started sending me information about it. And I was like, that's why I asked you about it. And I was like, wow. I knew that it was a massacre, but I've mentioned the Port Arthur massacre before, but I had never myself really investigated it deeply. And the more I looked into it, I was like, wow, it's just blatant.
It is.
It's just they weren't even trying over in Australia. And people, the witnesses, again, they love to say conspiracy theorists, right? Mm-hmm. They attack 9/11 truthers, quote unquote. Yet it was the 9/11 victims' families, the Jersey girls. Okay, look up 9/11 Press for Truth. Great film. It's up on YouTube. I actually have it up on a couple of the channels myself. You'll see that it was the victims' family members that actually pushed for the investigation and got that whitewashed crap. I mean, not that that's what they wanted, but that was put out to appease them. There wouldn't have even been an investigation. And the same thing here. You have witnesses and family members, people that, in this case, there was more people that were alive that witnessed it and survived, and you have because it was a gunman instead of the buildings coming down, and you have people where it's the same thing, like the lady we're going to play the audio from next segment. Her testimony and what she says is just drastically different. And then I'm sure she was attacked by the powers that be and labeled. I don't even know, and I'm willing to bet that she was probably either attacked in the media or attacked behind the scenes somehow and told either to shut up, and if she didn't shut up, then she was probably attacked in the media and tried the character assassination. Because
even more diabolically, Popeye, she was just flat out ignored. I mean, ignored.
Oh well, there you go. Well, the same thing they did. Well, that's what they did to William Rodriguez. They paraded him on stage until his story. Until he was like, there were bombs in the basement, that there were explosions in the basement before the plane hit, and all of a sudden the government went, and then he was persona non grata, and then they messed with him behind the scenes, but there no more media attention, nothing. And it doesn't surprise me that they did that to her. And what's her name? Wendy?
Wendy Scarr. Yes.
Is she still alive?
I've been trying to find that out for the last 24 hours, and I'm not sure.
I wonder
can't
if
find
any
any
of the
information
witnesses from the Port Arthur massacre have ever met a strange demise.
I wonder that myself. So I've been looking for that for the last 2 days to see what they were doing right now. I'd love to actually have some of them come and talk to me on my broadcast. So I will keep searching for them.
Yeah, keep trying to find them, man. If look, ladies and gentlemen, I know there's a lot of listeners in Australia. If you're listening in, if you hear this later on an archive or a rebroad or something, and you're in Australia and you know one of the survivors, and they want to get their story out, contact Tempest, contact me. Tempest, give out your email so they can email you, or however you want them to contact you.
You can contact me through my email. It's very simple. It's just Tempest Harbour, all one word, @live.com.
Say it again.
Quite simple. Tempest Harbour, all one word, @live.com.
There you go. And if you want to contact me, you can email me at contactdtrh@yahoo.com. So you spell out the full word, contact, and then DTRH@yahoo.com. And feel free to email me. And again, email Tempest if you guys know somebody, or someone in your family, or somebody who knows somebody, and they want to speak out. They want the truth out, and their view differs from the government. Contact us. We'll give them a platform to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Commercial break sneaking up. We're back in 3 short minutes. When we get back, more on the Port Arthur massacre. Don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So, Tempest, getting right back into it. Port Arthur massacre, you have this historical site that's privately owned, conveniently no security, and all of the CEO and all these head staff, which you'll hear actually the lady Wendy, we're going to play her audio in a second, but you're going to hear her actually mention that all the senior staff took off this day on some sort of retreat, and it was the one and only time ever that's happened. Where have I seen things like that happen before? Oh, I don't know, every other contrived event, but I digress. Anyway, so you have this event, this Port Arthur massacre, and after this obvious, horrific event, they pushed the draconian gun laws through, and they were successful because I'm sure a lot of people were like, oh my God, here are my guns, we don't want bad people to get a hold of the guns and kill kids and murder innocent people. And when you hear the testimony, it's some hardcore stuff.
They spun it too in the media, Popeye. If you didn't get on the bandwagon with the gun control legislation, you were somehow, discrediting the memory of the people that were massacred.
You hated children. You want kids to die.
Kind of.
You want to murder children if you're not for taking away people's rights because some insane individual supposedly went and did something.
That's it. So this next clip from Wendy Skur, her name is. She's a tour guide here at Port Arthur. She was. She's not anymore. She suffers tremendously from PTS and PTS, yes.
And this is the lady we were talking about earlier, right? The lady that she witnessed a lot of the horrific stuff, and she's the one that's going to bring up the fact that her, again, because this is a huge red flag, her bosses just happened to be away on a retreat that day and left a couple hours before the shooting occurred. Kind of like lucky Larry Silverstein just happened to have a doctor's appointment on September 11th and wasn't eating in Windows of the World like he always did, because he usually ate his breakfast there. But anyway, I digress.
Wendy had 20 years of experience with the St. John's ambulance as well. She was, had a lot of experience dealing with gunshot wounds prior to this. So it wasn't, she did have some kind of previous experience, and she was a very well trained first aider that actually trained a lot of the staff at Port Arthur. And because the place is such a small place, you've got to remember this too when you're listening to her, that most of these people she's talking about, she's known for a long time, some of them since they were born, you know what I mean? Like, this is a very close and small community. That's the part that really sort of gets to me a lot, because if you don't know the people, it's still hard, but if you work with them day in, day out, and you see them now a bloody pile, I mean, that's something that you'll never get over that. I don't think you will. Well, it'd be very hard to.
And she even says her testimony differs greatly from the official version, because the official version says that the guy used an AR-15, right?
That's right, an AR-15,
and this woman who's seen gunshot wounds before and has medical experience said that they looked like shotgun wounds and shotgun blasts. A lot of the wounds, especially when you hear her describe how there's body parts and parts of brain matter and stuff all over the walls. Generally, that's something you would see with a shotgun, scattergun type weapon, but just another red flag. But I digress anyway. The floor is yours.
Yeah, well, she was saying there was buckshot in some of the victims that she walked into. That's why she said a shotgun, but the police flat out told her that he didn't have a shotgun. And how they knew that when they weren't even there, they were still 4 hours away from getting there. Well, that's a good call. I'd just like to tell the people too, before we start playing the clip, that Hobart is an hour and a half away, and the phone call's made in 15 minutes, so they should have been able to get there, you'd think, within 2 hours. If they really pushed it, they could probably get there in less than an hour. You know what I mean? Police being the police. And the other thing I wanted to say before we started playing the clip, I don't know, it's just really emotional for me. Even putting that clip together over the last couple of days was pretty hard for me to do. But I thought me and Popeye could sit here and talk about what she says until we run out of breath. But listening to it in her words is just, I think, the most powerful thing to do. And she reminds me of just like everybody's mum. Your mum and my mum. She's just like a mum. And I'd love to hear, and I'd love the people at home to hear what Wendy has to say.
The shooting itself started at about 1:30. I say about because the 1:30 walking tour hadn't gone. If the guides didn't leave on time, they'd find they have no time to have 5-minute break when they came back before they'd have to take the next one. So the walking tours always went on time, and it hadn't gone, they hadn't even split the group up, so it was definitely before 1:30. And that is often disputed. I heard the sound of very, very loud bangs, and I never thought of a gun. I thought of it as possibly a gas explosion or anything but. I ran towards the cafe and I felt something fly by my head. Had no idea it was a bullet. Still wasn't thinking, actually. I thought I was having a brawl in there. I thought, well, I'm not going in there, lucky for me. And then a person came down the steps at the front of the Broad Arrow, and he wasn't touching the steps. He was going over them. He was flying. And he was warning us to run. Well, out in front of the information centre, we had about 70 people waiting to go on this tour. There was a busload of elderly Americans, and they sort of didn't want to leave. They thought, gee, they do it well down here, They really put on a show down here. So I got the warning to run, and I just froze. And he said the people were being shot, so I just froze to the spot, and I don't know how long I stood there, actually. And then I thought, God, if we don't let the police know, we're all going to be butchered. So I went back into the information centre. And when I got in there, Sue Burgess and Stephen Howard were in there, and they weren't phoning the police, but what they were doing was very good. They were phoning around the display houses and up to the toll booth and warning them to not let any more cars in. So I ran in and I rang the police. It was 1:32 p.m. exactly, and that has been recorded. I had little trouble convincing the police officer, naturally. He wouldn't be able to believe what I was telling him, not at Port Arthur. But in the end he said, be careful. So I knew he believed me. I'd decided where I was going, the other two hadn't. So I just said, follow me, I know where to go. And then Sue, being Sue, who was always very conscientious, she said, what about the money? Well, I used the F word, the money. One of them had grabbed a two-way radio. I hadn't thought of that, and so we ran. And just as we came out of the cafe, he came onto the balcony of the Broad Arrow, and he started firing shots. I've been told that he actually was firing at us, but he mustn't have been trying to kill us. I think he was just going over our heads. But the man that saved us was a gentleman at the penitentiary on a cherry picker, and he had it right up in the air, working on the brickwork. Anyway, he decided he'd better get out of there, and he started the motor up. And then he started having a go at him as he lowered it down. That would have been, the first shots would have been when he killed the Mikax. Then it seemed to be getting further and further away. We got up behind the cafe and we found a young lady who was working in the cafe, and she was just so traumatised and frightened. She was just standing there. As we walked down the hill to go into the cafe, we took the young girl with us, and I knew we wouldn't be able to take her in there, but we found a man that appeared to us to be shot with a shotgun. He seemed to have pellets all over him, but I've been told since it wasn't a shotgun. I don't know. Finding another man who'd been shot in the head, and he had a piece of dirty rag over it. He said, "Do you want to have a look at it?" I said, "No, leave the rag there." I also knew what I was going to have to face in the broad arrow, and having been on an ambulance for years, I've seen what gun can do. I took some very deep breaths and I entered the cafe. Had to put on a brave front. There were bodies and body parts everywhere, even on the ceiling, sliding down the walls, blood and bodies everywhere, the smell of warm blood. I knew I had to look for the girls. I had to go to the gift shop area, and both these girls were lying behind the counter of the gift shop, and both were dead. I'll talk about the first person I found alive. His name was Graham Collier. He was shot in the neck. He was choking on his own blood. He was on his side. I could do nothing for him. A man's voice said, "His mouth is so full of blood." I said, "Just put your fingers in his mouth and scoop it out." This was Dennis Gabberty, a Victorian policeman. He sat with Graham while I searched for more casualties. Graham was able to watch the gunman as he killed and wounded several people. Just before the gunman left the cafe, he was playing dead while the gunman stepped over and around him. Graham did survive that day. I then moved around the cafe looking for more alive. There were none. When I arrived at the only outside door in the gift shop, I found 5 dead, a total of 7, including my 2 workmates behind the counter of this gift shop. Another, they were all dead. These 2 girls, there's 2 staff members, this is the counter. They knew that door wouldn't open. It was broken. And they hid there. But had that door have opened, those 2 girls would have led those people to safety. We call this a Hessian screen here because 3 ladies were hiding in behind there. 2 of their husbands had pushed them in there. And there was another lady with them as well. Now, they, I believe, was nearly last killed in that cafe. I finally arrived in the office with the phone in front of me. I dialed the ambulance station in Hobart. Peter Morgan, who I know, was in the control room that day. He answered the phone. It was so good to hear from someone who I knew immediately would have the situation under control. I must have been babbling a bit because he had to calm me down. He asked me how many were dead. I didn't really know. I hadn't done a count. He said, how many can you see from where you're standing? I counted about 12. And he said, "What do you need?" I said, "Everything you've got. I need all the ambulances you can find, helicopters," and I said, "I need the police." It was just about then that Paul Cooper, another guide, he'd just finished his advanced first aid training, and he came in to me and he said, "I've got too much to do, I can't help you in here." He said, "I've got them at the buses," because the gunman had been to the buses. The local ambulance rang shortly after I'd contacted Hobart. They were outside. They weren't allowed to come in until they got the all clear. By this time, people began to come out of hiding. There was more ambulances arrived from Hobart. No police yet. Only the ones that came in the helicopters, because there was always a policeman in there. I can remember one of those police officers on the helicopter going to the phone and he rang police headquarters and he said, "Get some effing police down here." There was nothing they could do as they were unarmed and were required to leave with the helicopter. We still didn't know where the gunman was. I was now asking myself, where were the police? It was now about 3:30 p.m, 2 hours since I'd called them, and it should have only taken 1.25 hours for a police car. I know if an ambulance can arrive from Hobart, police should be able to do it even quicker. The policeman he'd arrived, that's right, one got there at 4:30. Sorry, I hadn't told you that. And they dropped him in at 4:25 and they drove out at 4:30, just dropped one off. And he was there, and all he was doing was able to collect names and addresses. He wasn't armed, and I really did feel sorry for him. We still had, probably about 400 people there. We had counted 32 dead bodies.
I have to just pause it for a second and point something out. That's a huge red flag, okay? that they dropped a cop off unarmed at an active shooter scene and then left him there. How did they know it was secure and that this cop wouldn't get killed by this raving lunatic gunman?
Well, that was something I wanted to tell the people listening too. When she says the helicopters dropped the police officer off, he was with the paramedics in the helicopter. That was an emergency airlift chopper. So it wasn't a police chopper. It was the ambos. And also, while she's describing all this stuff, this guy's walking around collecting names. This guy, the alleged shooter, is still walking around, and no one knows where he is.
That's what I'm saying. Like, why? Like they're like, hey, go get some names and start the investigation. Can I have a gun? No, you'll be all right. We don't even know where this guy is or who he is. No, it's all good. Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
No way, dude. I'm sorry. That's a big red flag. I didn't mean to interrupt her, but I had to point that out. It's just a huge red flag. Back to Wendy's testimony.
And we had about 19 injured. The situation was still so hopeless and we were helpless. Eventually the hotel sent an invitation down for the survivors to go to warm and have a cup of coffee and something to eat. The policeman installed himself in the hotel and went on collecting names and addresses. Then Walter Mikak came to me. I had no idea what he wanted. I felt sick to the stomach when he asked me if I had seen Nanette and his daughters. I thought they would have been home by now. He told me he'd found her car still at Port Arthur. But they weren't home. I couldn't answer that question, as I know he probably would have asked me to go and look, because I'd been told there was a woman and 2 children dead up the road, but I hadn't gone up to look because I couldn't have stood that. So they were looked after there by the staff. And the CEO, he'd come back from the East Coast. The staff was sent away to the East Coast, the management, at 11 o'clock that morning to stay overnight.
Another red flag.
And my supervisor, Robin Cooper, said that had never happened in the 18 years that she worked at Port Arthur. But they left at 11 o'clock and they were staying overnight. When they got word, they came back very quickly. They were back before the police came, but anyway, the CEO, he was wrapped. He said, we're going to get some SOGs in soon, and they're coming in by helicopter. I was to find out later that a helicopter held only 2 young police women off the beat from Hobart. It is now 4 hours after the shooting, and we had about 5 police that we knew of, and we're still in a hopeless situation. It was 6:30 p.m. when a warning came from the policeman in the hotel. We're still taking down names and addresses, that there was trouble outside. I later found that the staff at a house called Cloffer, just in front of the hotel, it's used as an administration building. 5 of the staff was out on the veranda having a cigarette when 3 shots were fired right in front of them. We don't know who fired these shots. We don't know why. We saw a news broadcast on television at the hotel. They said the gunman was surrounded at Seascape. So who was it? Had he escaped, or was it someone else?
So the gunman is supposedly surrounded somewhere else, and then these people are standing outside. They're given the okay by, the cop that's there, the 5 cops, the unarmed cops that are there, by the way, to go outside and have a cigarette. And while they're outside having a cigarette, more shots are fired at them, but they don't know who fired it because the guy that supposedly is the gunman is under siege elsewhere. And nobody thinks to say, well, that's a little odd. If you're wondering why they would do that, all you got to do is have somebody go around with a set of blanks or take their gun and aim it towards the ground and fire it within hearing distance, but not maybe sight distance of these people to scare them. It's called keeping the fear up. But
that's the one. And Seascape's about 5 kilometres away or more.
Which is
it's not like it could be
wild.
overheard shots from where he's healed or where he's bailed up at.
For the listeners that are not familiar with kilometers, what would that be like mileage-wise?
3 or 4 mile away.
So at the same time the shooter is 3 or 4 miles away, under siege elsewhere, he's supposedly firing shots in front of these people.
That's the one. And if you think this is red flaggery, it gets worse from here. I mean, there's some amazing stuff, coincidental stuff that happens.
Oh, yeah, there's more. Let's get back to Wendy.
Just after 7:30, in they come. Police were everywhere. They were heavily armed. They escorted the group from Cloffer to the backpackers hostel next to the hotel. Police also came in and was assisting our lonely policeman who did a wonderful job. Several trauma counsellors walked in from Hobart. They were treating us like children. I'll never forget these people. They had no compassion. I know a lot of the visitors obeyed, some had no option, and they were crying. Is that it has been reported that a lot of us have psychiatric conditions. We have indeed. I still see a psychiatrist. I've been in hospital many times in an effort to beat my depression. I've also had shock treatment. I even tried to commit suicide to find peace. This was about 14 months ago. In this, I'm not alone. We are not paranoid, and I've told you this because I think the powers that be will attack my mental state. I'm not mad, I'm just sad.
To a report that I'd heard that there had been a rifle stuck underneath the table and that the person, presumably not Martin Bryant, had arrived there, grabbed the gun and shot everyone from there. Did you give any report of during the shooting? Did you see the person shooting?
I didn't see the person shooting at all.
I was told there was a media blackout in Tasmania immediately following the shooting, and down there people just didn't know what was going on. I spoke to someone in my immediate area, and he confirms that his parents used to ring every night after the news to find out what the latest was. Could you confirm that?
I can confirm that. There wasn't an actual media blackout, but it was what the media said was very, very controlled. And I have heard that the people on the mainland had a lot more information given than what we did.
Do you have any idea at all how long the shooting went on for, in minutes? Because there's a lot of controversy about that, you see.
Thank you. I can tell you now for sure it was 4 to 5 minutes.
I'm going to pause it for one quick second. I want to point something out. The reason it happened think about it, it happened in Tasmania, and yet they had less information there than the people on the mainland in Australia itself. Now, why is that? Why is that? Because Tasmania was the ones that wouldn't give up their guns, so they had to keep them in a state of fear. You can't let them have too much information, and any information they have has to be controlled and has to be on that fear vibe. So it keeps them in that state of mind, so that way they make irrational, illogical decisions. Rather than a decision based on logic, they make a decision based on emotion. So I'm just pointing it out. I mean, the event happened in Tasmania, and yet they had less information about it than the people on the mainland. Hello? Doesn't that strike anybody as odd? I'm just saying. Back to Wendy.
I take it that you were not interviewed by the police about this massacre. Have you got any idea why?
I was interviewed by the police, but as soon as I got to the Broad Arrow part of it, I didn't want to know any more. And I also wasn't going to be going to court if there had been a trial.
Were all the people in the cafe killed?
No. There were supposedly, according to the court, there were 20 killed, 12 injured, with 29 bullets.
In your experience as a nurse, have you ever had any dealings with impaired mental abilities of patients? And do you think that an impaired person could have shot people like that?
Martin Bryant had an IQ of 66 and a mental age of 11. And I don't think he possibly could have carried it out in the 90 seconds to 2 minutes. I've got a document saying that even the coroner wasn't allowed into Port Arthur. It wasn't to leave there until 7:30 because the situation wasn't safe. But they didn't care about all those people that we had there. And I might add, there were plenty of police, only about half an hour away. They kept them there. They didn't let them in.
Where have we heard that before, where cops are told to stand down? Seems to be this common playbook that they all run off of, and although there might be a variant here or there, it's still this common theme. There's a lot of red flags with this. And we still have another piece of audio. I'm going to end up playing the second hour, the beginning of the second hour. I'll play the clip. It'll take up most of the segment. I'm not going to even interrupt it because, for time purposes, I knew I had a little bit of time to interrupt this clip here or there and point some things out. But the other one I won't be able to. But when you hear this information, I mean, come on, ladies and gentlemen, come on, just a little bit of rational thinking and logical thinking. Come on. I mean, there's some glaring things right in your face. And again, this is something I only knew a little bit about, and thanks to Tempest, he exposed me because, I asked him about it. He exposed me to a lot of information about this. He was like, yeah, here, man. And he gave me, and this is just a tiny amount of info. He gave me just a tiny amount, and it blew my mind.
I was just about to say that. Look, I'm trying to jam 4 hours of testimony here into, 35 minutes. So I will put the links in for the entire, what she said, but it's just impossible for the time constraints.
Can you find it on YouTube, like her full testimony?
Yeah, I'm going to put the link in the chat room for the people that are here, but it's if you just look up Port Arthur Massacre, it'll come up straight away on YouTube, and the name of it is Port Arthur Massacre Martin Bryant Setup. That's what it's called under YouTube.
And Martin Bryant was the name of the shooter?
The alleged shooter. By this stage, man, it sounds like there's at least 2, but it gets worse.
What happened to him?
Well, that's a whole story, man. We probably need another 2 hours to cover what went down with that guy. I mean, really, his story is bizarre.
Did they kill him, or was he killed on sight, or was he...
No, he's still spending time in jail, as far as I know. He's still there.
Did they say he was crazy?
Yeah, well... not crazy enough, man, but to pull his stuff off, but crazy enough.
Crazy enough to do it.
Yeah, but not crazy enough to. He was crazy enough not to stand trial. Well, he wasn't as crazy. You know what I mean? There was no trial.
He was sharp enough to pull it off, but crazy enough that he didn't have to stand trial. Gee, where have I seen that before?
Yeah, and there was no trial, so no witness testimony.
Oh, gee. Where have I seen that? Did he plead guilty?
Yes, he did, under duress, I do believe, yes.
Oh!
17 days of it.
Did he look like he was medicated at all?
I think so, just a little bit. And there's also... Well, we're going to break, I think.
Yeah, we are. We got about a minute, but
There's also some links with him going to England at the Tavistock for the couple of years leading up to this, too, which is quite amazing.
The Tavistock Institute.
Yep. Of course, there's no hard evidence.
Subtitled The Center for Mind Control. Wow. But no, that's just a coincidence. I'm sure. Absolutely. I'm sure that's just a coincidence that actually mirrors some of the modern day events here. You see why the listener said to me, hey, you should look into the Port Arthur Massacre because some of your shootings mirror it. And then I had looked into it a little bit, but you get sidetracked with all the other stuff that goes on here. And then when I had talked to you about it, I was like, oh, we need to do a show about this. Ladies and gentlemen,
it's grateful for the opportunity.
It's blatantly obvious. No, I'm grateful for you coming on, Tempest, and hanging out for 2 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We will be right back in 3 short minutes. Do not go anywhere. More on the Massacre. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, we're back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye from federaljack.com. It is February 4th, 2014. Tonight I'm hanging out with my good friend Tempest from Australia, and we've been going over the Port Arthur Massacre, which led to the current gun control legislation that is on the books over in Australia now. And this is important. People are going to say, well, what do you care? What do I care about Australia, Popeye? I live here in the good old United States of America, and we seem to have our own problems over here. I could, no offense to your friend Tempest, but I could care less about Australia. Well, you should care, because all the morons that are pushing for gun control and for you to not have your gun are using Australia's ban as a model. And they keep bringing Australian politicians over, and former politicians, like the former Prime Minister, who was in office at the time. They bring him over and all these other people to push the same type of draconian legislation here in the United States. And
also John Howard moved out of Australian politics and now works for the Carlyle Group. We all know who they are.
Oh, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
Another one of those coincidence theories.
And if you don't know who the Carlyle Group is, you need to use your search engine. We don't have enough time, nor do I want to get sidetracked getting into it. But just look up the Carlyle Group, and you'll see they're connected to people like Rumsfeld, Bush, Cheney. Do I have to say anything any further? I mean, isn't that enough evil right off the top? just to give you a good understanding of why you need to look that up. Look up the Carlisle Group. So this guy comes over here, as others in our own community here in the United States, use Australia's laws without even having him come over. But yes, what was his name again? The former Prime Minister.
John Howard.
John Howard.
Mr. Eyebrows.
Yeah, him. The big bush looks like two caterpillars on his face. That dude. He comes over here constantly, more than you would think, to push. Yes, you Americans need to adopt our Australian gun control type legislation. And the anti-gun crowd is like, look, this awesome politician from another country. Look, he floats in as he comes in to testify, and these people are like, oh my God, thank you so much for being here. They spend so much time kissing each other's rear ends, they rarely ever get to the meat and potatoes, and anything that does come out is all garbage anyway. But it's just propaganda. And we have lawmakers that are seriously considering this stuff and seriously pushing this stuff, considering pushing this. So, that being said, it's important to look back at the event that caused these laws to come into place in Australia. When you look at the event, lo and behold, boom, 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 red flags start popping up all over the place. So with that being said, we have quite a long clip. It's going to take up pretty much the rest of the segment here. And I'm going to let Tempest set it up really quick, and then I'll play it. Just let me know when you want me to hit play there, brother. But this is a guy named Andrew Morgan, I believe, correct?
Andrew McGregor, yep. He's a former Victorian police officer for 17 years. He just couldn't stomach any of this, and the way that the witnesses and the victims' families were treated after it, he wrote a book about it. And, of course, being a detective in the Victorian police, he was very efficient at unravelling some of these answers. And I've cut this right down from about 2 hours to what it is, and it's just rapid fire. He's just going to give you so much information very, very quickly here. And I'd also like to point out that this is from 2001 at the Inverell Forum, which is like a meeting for people who like to speak about freedom and alternative ideas outside the mainstream. There was a massive request for all journalists to come and ask questions and be there. Not one turned up. I'd just like to add that there wasn't one journalist from the mainstream media at this event.
Now, he mentions Wendy too, right? The lady that we played the audio from.
Well, Wendy was on just before him. So Wendy comes on and does her bit for 2 hours, and then he came on and did a 2-hour talk as well.
Well, I urge the listener to find the audio, the full audio, get YouTube downloader or whatever, and download the whole thing and watch both presentations in their entirety. The least you could do is take some time out to actually do the investigation yourself, because your legislators aren't going to do it for you, and you have to lead them. Don't let them lead you. That's the way it works.
And we'll get into some hard facts after this too, Popeye, about what the outcomes have been from this legislation. And in my opinion, it's an absolute failure.
That's why it's perfect, because we'll have the whole second segment, the whole last half hour, to point out the statistics, and again, someone in Australia, ladies and gentlemen, who you can hear right from on the ground, not some political crap, no agenda, just telling you the straight truth that yes, crime rates actually went up. What? Huh? Oh, go figure, because now they know that the innocent people are unarmed. And guess what? If they don't have access to a gun, bad people will still kill you with a baseball bat. Anyway, so, since we already
let's see what Mr. McGregor's got to say about it all, because this guy he actually rips the scab off of this. He does a really good job. So.
And by the way, thank you so much. And, myself and the listener, we owe you a big thank you for taking the time to cut this stuff up, from 2 hours each into the smaller segments so we could fit them on the show. Thanks a lot, brother. I appreciate it.
It's absolutely my pleasure to bring this information to people, and I think it's very relevant to what's happening today. Even though it's 18 years old, I think it's you can't forget history, and this is why.
I agree. Here we go.
Could I ask if there are any people from the media present tonight? Hands up, please. Anyone from the media? Now, the media were told about this. I would have assumed there'd be at least 40 or 50 people here to hear what was going to be said about such an important issue. Is it not interesting? Andrew McGregor.
I have used their documents, articles and interviews to gather this information. Neither Wendy nor I will accept any bunkum as the gunman being equal to the world's top anti-terrorist combat shooters for two reasons. One, the shooting inside the Broad Arrow Cafe lasted approximately 5 minutes. Two, there was in excess of 41 shots fired inside the Broad Arrow Cafe. This is from some of the survivors from both inside and outside the cafe. Let's name some of these survivors. Firstly, there is Wendy Skerb, who is with us tonight. Then there is Major Sandra Vanderpeer, who was inside the gift shop area, and in her statement states that the shooting lasted approximately 5 minutes, and she believed that the shooting continued after the gunman reloaded inside the gift shop area. Graham Collier, an ex-RAF fitter, states that he watched the gunman walk around the cafe area shooting people for approximately 4.5 minutes as he lay on the floor nearly drowning in his own blood. Outside, near the information centre, two Vietnam veterans, John Godfrey and Peter Stainthorpe, also have contested the 90 seconds to 2 minutes time for the shooting inside the Broad Arrow Cafe. Jackie Lane wrote an article in a police magazine, again stating that the shooting went on for about 5 minutes. The time frame for the gunman shooting inside the cafe for 90 seconds to 2 minutes maximum is fabricated. It is an outright lie, and any person peddling that story is pushing a concoction, an outright lie. All the witnesses tell us that the gunman went up to the victims and shot them from fairly close quarters. However, there are many clues that state it was not Martin Bryant inside the cafe on that fatal afternoon. More bunkum is the statement that the gunman killed 12 victims and wounded another 4 in the first 15 seconds. This statement is supposedly supported by the Wilkinson videotape, and this tape recorded the sound of the shots by themselves. Another video camera recorded the shots fired for 25 seconds as being 21 shots, which according to the government prosecutor, Mr. Damien Bugg, QC, leaves only 8 shots to be fired in the next 65 seconds. That is 1 shot every 8.5 seconds. This is not what the witnesses tell us. They all state that the shots continued at about 1 shot every second or 2. In the Wilkinson tape, there are 5 shots fired, being shot 7 to 11 within a period of 1.80 seconds. And we are supposed to believe that any person could shoot 5 persons accurately in the head in that time? Mr. Bugg, QC, continually reinforces this statement, stating it is supported by the ballistics and forensic evidence. But the Tasmania Police ballistics expert, Sergeant Derek Dutton, states otherwise. In the American Wound Ballistics Review, Dutton states that 30 fired cartridge cases were located inside the Broad Arrow Cafe, not 29. Then again, in another article written by Sergeant Derek Dutton in the Australian Police Journal, Dutton argues that it is not accurate to count the number of shots fired simply by the means of the fired cartridge case alone, especially as the crime scenes were not protected until after sunset, and many of the fired cartridge cases had been souvenired, especially in the car park, where only 4 cases were located by the police, 2.223 and 2.308 cartridge, with another case being returned by a bus driver. How many shots were fired inside the Broad Arrow Cafe during the massacre? I have calculated a minimum of 41 shots using the court document and witness statement. You see, there was a fire exit door within the gift shop area of the Broad Arrow Cafe that was supposedly locked. But just how do you lock a fire exit door? This was the door that prevented many people who were inside the gift shop area from escaping the gunman. It was later conceded that this door was not locked, as stated to the Hobart Supreme Court, but rather it was broken. The next little gem is the Prince sports bag, or should I say 2 Prince sports bags. You see, the gunman was lugging around a very heavy Prince sports bag and a large video camera, which were then found left on a table inside the Broad Arrow Cafe after the massacre. The problem is that several witnesses also saw the gunman carry the Prince sports bag out of the cafe and put it in the boot of the Volvo. Why did he need 2 Prince sports bags? Also consider that there were live .308 rounds found on the floor inside the cafe. The only weapon used inside the cafe was the AR-15, which uses .223 ammunition. But in the boot of the Volvo were several hundred .308 rounds. So how did these .308 rounds end up inside the cafe? Chris Isles had been a Newbina policeman for about 12 years and had been transferred to Sorrel about 6 months prior to the massacre. And his replacement at Newbina was Constable Paul Hyland. Many people are aware that Constable Paul Hyland and Gary Whittle of Denali were at Saltwater River when they received a radio message at 13:38 hours that there had been a shooting at Port Arthur. However, Jim Laycock states that within 3 minutes of Zoe Hall being murdered and Glenn Pierce being kidnapped outside the Broad Arrow store, which was at approximately 1:45 p.m, Constable Chris Isles had arrived at the scene in a marked police vehicle. Laycock's statement is corroborated by another witness, Kyle Spruce. Then Constable Chris Isles took off in pursuit of the gunman and was never heard of again within the events that constitute the Port Arthur massacre. Questions must arise regarding what Constable Chris Isles was doing out of his area on this quiet Sunday afternoon, and the fact that he never appears to be utilised, especially when the survivors at the Port Arthur site were required to wait for 6 hours before they received proper police presence. Again, having been the local Port Arthur police 12 years, Constable Isles knew all the locals, the staff of Port Arthur and the emergency crews that were utilised to perform the various police duties for the police that were held back from attending at the site due to the dangers presented to the police. So Chris Isles vanishes, and then Constable Hyland and Gary Whittle attend to Port Arthur, and then on to Seascape. However, there is another policeman to enter the scene. Sergeant Andrew Mark Fogarty from Bella Reef Police Station has arrived at the scene. Sergeant Fogarty is also a team leader with the SOG. Both Hyland and Whittle state that when they arrived at Seascape, the BMW was already burning at the front, and when the fire reached the back section of the vehicle, it exploded. Martin Bryant, in his police interview, states that he was knocking at the back door of Seascape when the BMW exploded, but also confuses himself by saying that he must have been burnt by the fire that destroyed the BMW. Martin Bryant also believes that the hostage died in the BMW fire. Now consider this. One of the task force members investigating the Port Arthur massacre has stated to witnesses that it was the SOG who set fire to the BMW so as to negate its use to the persons inside Seascape as a means of escape. This means that if the BMW was already burning on the arrival of Hyland and Whittle at Seascape, then the only reported SOG member at the scene at that time was Sergeant Fogarty, and therefore Fogarty would have had to have been the SOG member who set the BMW alight. The police task force member also stated that it was the same SOG member who set fire to Seascape Cottage, using the same means as with the BMW, that is, by firing a phosphorus grenade into the building. This grenade apparently went through the attic window facing onto the Arthur Highway. In his statement, Andrew Fogarty states that he fired off 2 illuminating flares over Seascape, but under the orders of Sergeant Morris. Then we have Constable Allen stating that at one stage, just before dark, the gunman was spotted on the roof of an adjoining building, and he needed to be identified before the SOG marksman could shoot the offender. Constable Allen stated that when he put his head up out of the culvert to take a view of the gunman on the roof, he was shot at, the bullet striking the front bumper bar of the police car he was behind. Now this gives us 2 items of information. One, that the person shooting at Allen was listening to the police communications, and 2, that the gunman on the roof was not the person shooting at Constable Allen. Sergeant Fogarty would never have permitted a gunman in his sights to actually shoot another policeman. Now this incident with the shot at Constable Allen sparked off 2 other incidents. The first was with the SES and fire brigade members who had been monitoring the police communications. A fire truck did the rounds at Port Arthur, warning the personnel there that the gunman was on the loose and heading this way. This created absolute panic at Port Arthur site because there was still no protection for them from any police. The second incident was that the police commander, Assistant Commissioner Lupo Prinz, called in assistance from the Victoria Police SOG and then notified the National Crisis Centre in Canberra, terrorist situation. By Monday morning, with the media from all over the world now focusing on Port Arthur, the Pink Palace, as the locals called Seascape Cottage, is set alight by Martin Bryant, we are told, except for a task force member who states that it was by Sergeant Fogarty. This, of course, destroyed all the evidence that was to be found inside Seascape Cottage, except for the 2 murder weapons, which were found outside Seascape in a badly damaged state. As the police had been informed by Jamie inside Seascape during the siege, but the only person to emerge from the fire was Martin Bryant, who was arrested, handcuffed, and placed in the back of an ambulance and conveyed to the Royal Hobart Hospital. Sergeant Eric Dutton did a 200-page report, ballistics report, and I haven't got that. However, both both firearms were badly damaged. I doubt if he could link the AR-15 because the bullet exploded in the breach. It would have created damage to the breach. So the Tasmania police set up a task force under Superintendent Johnston to investigate the Port Arthur massacre. A member of that task force, Inspector Maxwell, travelled to Victoria, spoke to a Bill Drysdale of Yass in relation to one of the murder weapons, the AR-15. Bill Drysdale identified that firearm by the gunsmith's mark on the barrel. Furthermore, this particular firearm had been handed to the Victoria Police at Lilydale in 1993, when that particular firearm had been made illegal. However, the AR-15 firearms that had been handed into the Victoria Police during this amnesty were then issued to the Victoria Police SOG as weapons, until they were issued with new weapons in 1994. And these AR-15s were then sold to a Bendigo gun dealer for sale overseas, except for one. The compact AR-15, or the carbine AR-15, that had once been the property of Bill Drysdale. It went through the police books as being destroyed at the Sims Metal Furnace, but somehow ended up in Tasmania at the Seascape Cottage after the siege. However, this damaged AR-15 could not have been the weapon used at Port Arthur. It was damaged by blowing up around inside the breach. The creation of this damage also creates a loud explosion, enough to deafen a person for up to a couple of days. Please note that Martin Bryant's hearing was not affected when he was arrested at Seascape. Also note that all the police statements during the siege tell of the various weapons being fired, which they could differentiate by the sounds alone. And when the fire took place, they could also tell the difference between exploding ammunition and shots being fired. But not one mention is made of an extremely loud explosion that must have occurred when the AR-15 was damaged. Thus, the only conclusion was that this weapon was damaged prior to the siege, and thus prior to the massacre. The other weapon used during the massacre was an FNS SLR, of which Martin Bryant denied ever owning. Mind you, the firearm that was suddenly found in the piano at Bryant's Clare Street residence, an Australian arms semi-automatic, .223, is never mentioned in the only police interview that took place on the 4th of July. That apparently 15 firearms were destroyed in the burning of Seascape Cottage. That the guns there belonged to the son, Glenn Martin. I don't know a gun nut yet who would keep his firearms at his parents' house, an hour and a half away from home. Secondly, Glenn Martin, in an article printed in the Melbourne Sunday Herald Sun, states quite emphatically his parents didn't have any firearms on the property. He didn't have any. So where did the firearms come from? Martin Bryant didn't have them. Martin Bryant always admits he owned 3 firearms, the AR-10, the AR-15, and the Daewoo shotgun. Helicopter pilots were normally a scarcity on a Sunday afternoon. Normally it is difficult even to locate one. But on this particular Sunday, they were able to obtain the services of 3 helicopter pilots. For the ambulance staff, the possible staff shortage was overcome by utilising staff and volunteers that were attending courses for that Sunday afternoon. The Southern District Mortuary Service even had a 22-body hearse waiting to be used for such an emergency. It was the only one of its kind in Australia, and it was stuck in the southern part of Tasmania. Right on call. However, it was the Royal Hobart Hospital that demonstrated the height of preparedness. They were able to call on the services of 25 trauma specialist doctors from all over Australia who had just completed a seminar at the midday on that Sunday afternoon and whose last lecture had been in relation to a terrorist attack. Oh dear. It was the EMA, the Emergency Management Australia Port Arthur seminar papers, that demonstrated the preparedness of all these bodies, especially with the Royal Hobart Hospital and its newly completed Code Brown emergency plan. But we are then given another clue. The coroner, Ian Matheson, the staff at the Royal Hobart Hospital, including some doctors and many ambulance service personnel, initially believed it was simply another exercise. There is, however, one last seminar to consider, and that is unique in that it was the first, the only ever seminar to be held for the top 10 personnel at the Port Arthur Historic Site. And it was to be held on the 28th and 29th of April 1996. What was this seminar about? Nothing. By the time these particular staff members arrived at Swansea, the massacre had occurred and everybody went straight back to the site to assist. Port Arthur was in fact, at the very fact, a media exercise. The media were catered for in every possible way. The human beings, the volunteers and everybody else at Port Arthur were totally ignored. But back to Martin Bryant, who has been arrested by the SOG and conveyed to the Royal Hobart Hospital. On Tuesday the 30th of April 1996, police endeavoured to interview Martin Bryant in the presence of a hospital doctor. But Bryant wishes to have nothing to do with them, and so he is simply charged with one count of murder, that of Kate Scott. On the following day, Martin Bryant was again interviewed, but not by police, Dr. Ian Sale. In notes taken by the prison officer guarding Martin Bryant, Zeb Lavelle, Sale states to Bryant, "Whatever you say to us may be used against you in court." Do you understand what I said? Consider the implications of this evidence, if this evidence is correct. Dr. Sale has just stated that he is collecting evidence to use against Martin Bryant in a court of law. Yet, his reports formed part of the basis of Mullen's report, which was the only evidence used by the defence in the sentencing of Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant was in London on the 22nd of April 1994 when the case on him brought under the Mental Health Act was heard in camera at the Hobart Supreme Court. I have no idea how that could be permitted, but it was. Another interesting fact is that people in Hobart will state emphatically that Martin Bryant did have a shooter's licence, and when asked how he obtained it, he says, "My lawyer got it for me." John Avery, his legal representation, took 14 or 15 visits over 17 days to convince Martin Bryant he had no other option but to plead guilty. John Avery also states, I think, he believed he also had to do the right thing by the community. In other words, John Avery was acting as a prosecutor. Martin Bryant had no legal representation. We were not permitted to have a trial in relation to Martin Bryant. Now let us consider the words of the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Tim Fischer, when he spoke to a group of professional shooters at Alice Springs in May 1996. "If we don't get it right this time, the next time there is a massacre, and there will be, then they'll take all our guns off us." What Mr. Fischer is stating is that unless Australia brings in the required legislation, then Australia was going to suffer another massacre. The legislation was initiated and Australia has had no more massacres. The fact that many have ignored the new ideology-bound firearm laws and that firearms are still easily obtainable on a black market is irrelevant to these laws. The fact that the 10th of May meeting had to make its decision in time for the evening news is straight out of a James Bond fictional scenario. Here is the 6 o'clock news. Big Ben chimed 3 times today at 2 o'clock, and the Australian Prime Minister, Mr. John Howard, was successful in enforcing the various states and territory police ministers into accepting his unconstitutional new guidelines for a total firearm control in Australia. So what happens the next time Australians feed to hear the new ideology? Who will they murder to bring us into line? Will it be your parents, your brother or sister, or your children or your grandchildren? Don't say it will never happen, because it already has.
There you go. That's some powerful stuff right there. And there's a few red flags, because the break's coming up. But when we get back, I'm gonna point out just 3 of the big things. There's a lot, but there's 3 big things that stick out right off the top. And if you actually get a chance to watch the full 2 hours, I'm sure, again, Tempest had to edit it down for me, to fit. But
way too much to jam into 27 minutes.
Well, no, it was good, dude. The way you did it, it was like bullet points, bam, 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 firing off a bullet point after bullet point with information. And it's just amazing because it's like reading a list. It's like literally hearing somebody read a list. Just incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Final segment coming up. Don't go anywhere. Research to Port Arthur Massacre. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Final segment, tonight's live edition, DTRH. Interesting factoid I just saw while we were, the last minute while we were on air. I figured we'd wait till come back in from break. We just had another earthquake down here in the Caribbean. According to the National Weather Service, it was a 4.3, 16 miles northeast of Cuba. So it was probably about, a little less than 90 miles from the Keys there. So the Caribbean plate seems to be acting up lately. And an earthquake a couple weeks ago, too. Interesting.
Did you feel it?
No, we didn't feel it a couple weeks ago either, so. We're pretty flat, so you'd think, but no. It's. I guess it's because it's out there, it's deeper in the water. I guess the water probably dampened it coming across there, across the Florida Straits and stuff, but I'm sure if it was a much more powerful quake, we would have heard it, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. Interesting. Anyway, getting back to the Port Arthur massacre, I noticed this, again, three, there's a lot of red flags, first of all, and thank you again to Tempest for laying that out, kind of like, in a bullet point, like an audio bullet point list of, red flags presented by this gentleman, but I urge the listener to go and find both of just type in Port Arthur Massacre on YouTube, and I'm sure it'll come up Port Arthur Massacre testimonies, and I'm sure it'll come up. The three red flags that I want to point out, and obviously there's more, but for lack of time and because I want to get into the gun control laws and everything else, the three huge red flags that I see. One, the EMS, police, fire personnel, whoever was dispatched, first responders, a lot of them thought it was a drill because there had been so many drills going on. Okay. That little familiar? It's one of the red flags I wanted to point out. Two, there happened to be doctors nearby, and they had just finished a seminar on nothing other than a terrorist attack. And, obviously in a terror attack you would have a mass casualty event. So here you have a real-life mass casualty event, and these doctors who just finished a seminar on such an event just happen to be nearby. How convenient.
All the best in the country, too, in one place, very close.
Look at that, all the best in one place at a seminar for the same thing that pretty much just happened, and they just happened to be there, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. That's red flag number 2. Red flag number 3, the AR-15 conveniently had a round explode inside the breech, so there would never be able to match it ballistically to any rounds that they say were recovered from the scene or any victims. Even if the round wasn't recovered at all and they faked it, and it doesn't matter. The point is they say that there would be no way to check it, right? Because if they did really have the weapon that was supposedly used on the scene, you'd be able to match whatever round was presented as evidence and say, oh, look, be able to fire it and say, look, pull the round out, put it under a microscope and say, oh, look, it matches ballistically. Look, it's got the same striations and everything exactly. It's got to be the exact same the rifle that was used. There you go. Or if it didn't match, it would be, wow, these things don't match at all. Obviously, this rifle couldn't have been the one that was used. Wherever you got this thing must have been planted, or where'd you guys find this? Maybe it was mixed up, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Conveniently, the round exploded inside the rifle. So they'd really never be able to ballistically match it. So you had to go by the story that, yes, this was the rifle, trust us.
Well, the AR-15's got a very interesting history too, Popeye. Apparently it was destroyed on the mainland, according to the weapon maker's mark on it, sometime prior to the Port Arthur massacre. So it shouldn't have even been in existence, that gun, as far as all records concerning that gun didn't exist. But there it was at the scene with a blown-out breech. And also another thing about the gun is that Martin Bryant was apparently left-handed, and the gun was a right-handed gun. And I'm not too familiar with the AR-15 myself, but I know if you get a breech explosion with most high-caliber rifles, the breech goes somewhere and usually straight back at the guy holding the gun. He had no injuries to say that had happened to him. So that's just another little point I'd like to chuck in there.
I just think it's very convenient that they happen to have this weapon destroyed, that they would not be able to... oh, look, you'll have to take our word for it. Red flag number 3. And more. There's way more than that, but those are the 3 biggies right there. That right off the bat, the weapon is destroyed to the point where you can't match it ballistically, so you have to take their word for it. Okay, it's the argument is framed for you. The evidence is painted to fit that argument. You see where I'm going with that? Again, the doctors, the best doctors in the country, happen to be...
So the government and the authorities can say, look, we took control of the situation, just in case... Yeah.
Well, it also looks like they took control, too. It gives them that, which is what it did. It gave them that, it gives off that impression that they did. But if you listen to the witness testimony, they said it took them forever to get there. And, they said they should have been there like an hour and a quarter, hour and a half at the most. And here you have... the cops took over 2 hours to get there. Or actually, no, it was even longer than 2 hours, wasn't it?
It was 4 hours for the police to get anywhere on the ground at Port Arthur itself. 4 hours.
Why would you helicopter in 2 cops with no guns? like
I don't know,
2
man.
beat cops with no guns.
There's not one part of the official story that makes any sense at all.
Like, okay, guys, we have an active shooting scene. Okay, get ready. Okay, don't put any gear on. Don't take any weapons with you. Get that pad and that pen. Move it. You're on the helicopter, and they're like, okay, when we land, I want you two to run off, and with your pad and your pen, run into the melee. And these 2 cops were like, yeah, no problem. I'm not worried about getting shot. What?
Yeah, that doesn't add up. The 22 victim capacity hearse that was, shuffled over to Tasmania, I think it was a couple of weeks before Port Arthur too. Like, that was right on the spot as well. Just enough room to just about put everyone in. They probably had to make 2 trips, but you know what I mean. That was very convenient as well. Quick clean-up.
Dude, again, it just reeks, okay? And that's 3 small little points. 3 small little points.
There's so many more.
Exactly. Really, there's just 3 small little points that reek. Can you imagine the rest? It's just... Well, look, obviously this was done, again, conveniently. It happened in Tasmania, one of the areas that just so happened to be fighting against giving up their guns and pushing, with this, getting on board with gun control and stuff. And this event just so happens to happen there. And then the news coverage is spotty at best in the area where it happens, where you need the people to have the information, right? And it's better on the mainland, and yet the people that are going to be voting on the legislation that's obviously going to be pushed in the following weeks after the event are going to have, little to no information, just emotion to go off of. This doesn't look like a recipe for disaster at all. At least for your rights anyway. No. And of course, I'm being sarcastic with my last statement. Of course, it's a recipe for disaster. Look what they did. You can clearly see just by understanding, by having a little bit of understanding now, ladies and gentlemen, having those Hoffman sunglasses on, you can go back in time now and look at that event, and with a fresh set of eyes, look, we've never even discussed the Port Arthur Massacre, Tempest, on this show before. I've mentioned it, via, saying Port Arthur Massacre, but I've never dived into it, ever. And here we are, diving into it, and ripping it apart and covering just a few of the small things that obviously point out, and right off the bat with using a little bit of logic, no emotion, just looking at it logically and rationally, you're like, wow, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Not at all.
Look, 4 plus 4 does not equal 72. I don't understand. What are you trying to tell me, Australian government?
And what was the motive behind doing it? 2 weeks later, they completely bypass every law legislator that we have in the country to bring in the gun control laws. But it didn't end there. They basically had the opportunity to undermine every sort of constitutional law we had in the country, and that changed everything from that point on. Not just with the gun laws, but with everything. Now that there is no, it's kind of like what's happening in the States right now with Barry. How he's got his pen and his phone, and he's sort of running the show. He bypasses Congress. I think he said 6 times in that address to the Union, or the speech of the Union address. What it was, 6 times I think he said that he'd go around Congress to get what he wanted. And that's basically exactly what happened after Port Arthur here in Australia too, with Johnny Boy. Oh,
our State of the Reich address. Well,
State of the Reich.
Yeah, exactly. I've been saying for a while now, and I've always, when one of these weird events happens with the mass shootings, I don't hop on it right away unless there's certain things that just reek right off the bat. There's certain indicators that, certain markers that if they are met, it's like, okay, more than likely. And there's been like the Aurora, Colorado shooting. That night I went on air and I was just like, this, I'm not trying to jump to conclusions, but already this thing reeks. And I always urge the listeners to take 2 or 3 days, because that's when, a lot of the information changes in the first 72 hours. And you can at least, that's when a lot of the emotion starts to amp down, and you can at least, it gives you some time to analyze everything. Don't just jump on things. But when you look at this stuff, man, it's just, I see, what I see them doing is I see them, they might have wanted to try to pull the Port Arthur Massacre type event, right? And it didn't work. They were hoping that the Aurora, Colorado shooting would work. That didn't work. So then Sandy Hook happens. Again, the legislation isn't passed, right? And it doesn't work. It's not the event that pushes it over yet, right? But just like you said, there were similar events before Port Arthur leading up to it, right? So Sandy Hook might not be... Away. Yeah, exactly. Chipping away. You know, they understand that they might not be able to fell the tree in one foul swoop. So they'll chip away at it enough until the tree topples over onto its side. And then the tree is down. And that's the way it is. That's what they're doing to the Second Amendment. That's what they're doing right now to your ability to protect yourself. And not just from, bad guys, but from, a tyrannical government. They're chipping away at it slowly but surely. And how are they doing that? Well, because legislation, you haven't had that uproar by the mass public yet for gun control legislation and take away my rights. I'm safer if only you guys have guns and only the crazies have guns, right? So there's been this push where since there hasn't been that event that's been able to topple it yet, right? They have to chip away at it. So now it's every time, someone shoots themselves cleaning their weapon and it's on Fox News. And now you see this rash of real school shootings going up. And if you noticed, it's not 15 or 20 people getting killed. You ever notice the real school shootings? It's like 2-3 people getting killed at the most. Yeah, before the person's
going after someone in particular.
You ever notice it's not really like all the questionable ones where there's really mass amounts of students killed. It's always questionable. Whereas the real school shootings seem to. It kills only a few people. I'm not saying that, a few dead are more acceptable than a lot of dead. I'm just saying it's odd that the big mass ones where there's mass casualties seem to always be shady as opposed to the real events that happen where it's like 1 to 3 or maybe 4 kids that get injured or killed. It's just, the reality versus what they present seem two different things. Anyway, a lot of those events are copycat stuff, and that's because the news media constantly puts on the TV here, school shooting. They put up the person's name, picture. Well, to a young, impressionable mind, especially one that perhaps is suicidal, they might look at that like, hey, nobody knows who I am now, but in death, everybody will know who I am. And I'm not trying to vilify these kids like they're, oh my God, there's some sort of cartoon character of evil. But, if they're young and suicidal, they might say, what, I'm going to kill everybody. Let's make this a public spectacle. I'll be famous. In death, everyone will know who I am, and I'll get the people that wronged me. And they're a young, malleable, impressionable mind. And by the way, the FBI and police and all these profilers and stuff, they understand this stuff. This is a basic concept that they understand going back and researching stuff back into like the 70s, even earlier. They had a basic idea that when you put the information out, and they still do this to this day, where if there's a huge murder and stuff, back in the day when the media would pick it up, the cops would always leave out certain information. They would have the media leave out certain facts. So that way, when the copycats that they knew would occurred, they'd be able to differentiate between the copycats and the real killer. So if they have to do that, and they know they have to do that tactic already with like murder crimes, and why would you constantly on the TV, on CNN, on MSNBC, on every channel, on every news station, talk about the shooter, the terrorist, oh my God, he scared everybody, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. To a young, impressionable mind, you just made that person famous. They already know what's going to happen. Why do you think it's covered so much? They never just benefit in one way. So that's one of the ways is by doing it and covering it so much, they actually cause it to happen more often, okay, which serves their agenda. And then when these events do happen, they cover every little shooting. So now when you watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox, every day there's a shooting in the news. Every day. Because they cover every time there's a shooting. And yes, people, because there are guns, there are shootings that occur, okay? But their coverage is being done, so they're doing so to push this emotion, this, like Eric Holder said, we have to brainwash people into thinking differently about guns. Well, that's exactly what they're doing. They're brainwashing everybody into thinking differently about guns. So that way, the next time there's an event, right, what they'll do is they don't need to have big, massive events all the time, because stuff like that, it starts to get questionable. So by covering it enough, they know that they've created this this idea that there's going to be copycats, and then by keep covering these copycats, it creates more copycats, right? And then every time someone shoots himself, someone shoots themselves in the foot, they cover that. Whatever. Somebody has a hunting accident, they cover that. The next thing you know, because the only thing, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a mall shooting. Every day someone turns on the news and it's someone else is shot, someone else is shot, someone else is shot. So it's just it's that slow tick, tick, tick. It's that slow, even if it's a slow light swing of the axe, it's still a swing of the axe. You know what I'm saying, Tempest? And it's slowly chipping away, like you said, chip, chip. It's a perfect analogy, chipping away, chip, chip, chip. And they're doing it because if they did bigger swings and took off bigger chunks, people might realize what they're doing and they'll come to stop it. But see, the subtle manipulation is how they control everything. So they constantly have their media hounds go out there and talk about a news story where it involves guns in some negative light. And it's every day, very low level. Guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. Sandy Hook, guns are bad, Sandy Hook, guns are bad. Gabrielle Giffords, guns are bad. Mental health, guns are bad, guns are bad, guns are bad. Fear guns, mental health. To the point where now people see guns and literally they break down and emotionally start crying.
Yep.
Okay? And that's
fear.
Well, that's what they're doing here. So we only have about 9 minutes left. I want to give you the floor. But what I see them doing is manipulating society here in America, and I see into disliking guns. And they're doing it with the slow drip, so that next time a big event happens, people will be that much closer to we need to ban guns and jail the people that have guns. Oh my God, I want to be safe. I'm so scared. Oh my God, and that's pretty much the same thing that happened over by you. And now they're pushing your draconian type of gun legislation. So in the last couple of minutes here, explain to the Americans how bad the crime rate actually has gotten, because we have our politicians and CNN, and MSNBC and all them that want to, push for more gun control. We have them saying, "Oh my God, Australia is such a safer place. The crime rates all over have dropped," and I know that's not the truth. So, we got about 8 minutes left. The floor is yours.
Well, that's a good way to lead into that, Popeye. Well, what was the outcome of these gun laws, and what do I believe these massacres drove home? That the fact that we need to get guns out of the hands of the public. And since that's happened in '96, murder rates have gone up by 19% committed with ballistics. Home invasions have gone up by 21% because the criminals know that people aren't armed in their house. So, home invasions went through the roof. Assaults committed with guns increased by 28% because the criminals have the guns and the people that aren't criminals don't have them. And this is the one that really, you got to go, what the hell's going on here? And armed robberies went up by 69%. Armed robberies went up by 69% since 1996. So it obviously did not work at all. And while I've got the floor, I'd just like to also say that there was a time in Australia when death by gun was in plague proportions. And this was from the years of 1788, when the first fleet landed here from Britain, and they got off onto the beach, until 1850. They killed 20,000 of the native custodians of this country, who were unarmed. The British soldiers were armed, and they were dictating their authority over them at the point of a gun. So that's what happens when you've got a population who isn't armed and able to defend themselves. You get an authoritative government that does have the guns that will make you succumb to what they want. And that is the ultimate end game, isn't it? Because it didn't do a lick of difference to the crime rate involving guns. It didn't bring down, it didn't make the world a safer place. We don't have these mass shootings anymore, but as we just highlighted over the last couple of hours, were they legitimate shootings in the first place? One lone nut. So just sum it all up, gun control does not work. It does not work. There are 3.5 million guns, I still believe, in this country, out in the public. Over half of those are owned by licensed gun owners, and they believe there's another 1 million that aren't owned by licensed gun owners. And the interesting statistic I'll throw up next to that one is that our military apparently only have 250,000 guns between the entire United Forces of Australia. So there's more guns out in the general public than there are in our military. So we are still armed in this country, and they're still pushing for more gun control. They want this out now. They want that out now. And the truth of the matter is it's never been easier to buy a gun on the black market. It's never been cheaper to buy a gun on the black market because now there's competition.
Of course, because it's the only place to get them.
That's right. You know,
the
and
need
the law
is going to be there. See, this is what the nanny state freaks don't understand, and these control freaks don't get. You cannot regulate human behavior like that. You can't. You're trying, and it's failed time and time again. I mean, you have to. It's a matter of, you know how they say, well, we have to brainwash people to change the way they think about guns. No, if you really weren't about controlling people and you wanted humanity to evolve, you would just push people to enlighten themselves. And once we actually started looking at each other instead of in terms of, oh, you're this, so you're less than human. If we just started looking at each other as all equals, a lot of the problems, violence-wise, would stop. Okay, the gun is just an instrument, and obviously you can see over in Australia, you know, they took away the guns, and home invasions went up. Hello?
Yep.
Hello? Why did that happen? Oh, that's because they know that everybody inside the house is easy pickings. Because if they have weapons, granted, most of those people don't, and if they do, I mean, like with the bolt action, you have to keep the rifle in one spot, of the bolt in another, and then the ammo in another spot. That way, and then if you think about it, so in case of emergency, you're supposed to run to the one spot and get the ammo, run and get the bolt, run and get the gun, and then put it all together. What is this, a video game?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
And meanwhile, you know, Mr. Not Too Nice Guy, he's coming in through your window or your front door, and I don't think he's here to play around. You know?
Exactly. Meanwhile, you got somebody, in your house, possibly hurting your wife or your children or whatever, or people, multiple people, groups of, and causing damage, doing Lord knows what, and you have to run around like you're in a video game collecting the pieces to your weapon. I mean, this is insane. And didn't they tell you guys we're not going to come after the bolt actions, and now they're coming after the bolt actions?
Well, that's it. If they say they're not going to, you know they're definitely coming for it. But we've only got a few minutes left, and I'd really like to stress this to everyone listening in the United States, plus my fellow countrymen, and especially the people of Queensland, where the state that I live in. They are trying to push this Vlad legislation through Parliament here in the next 2 weeks. This legislation, and we see what they've done here with the gun control in Australia. If they bring it in here and they see how it works, it won't take long before it's in your neighbourhood as well. And this Vlad legislation, flat out, will help and will help the police, will hinder us getting together in groups to just protest things. And it's up to the discretion of the arresting officer and the magistrate. There's no jury, and you can be sentenced up to 15 years in what they call a star chamber. I highly recommend that people look that up and see what this, the next step of tyranny really is, because I think you have laws similar in the States, but I don't think there's anything quite like this out there yet. Not in the Western world, not in the civilized world. But it's definitely something worth looking into, and it's something to be concerned about.
15 years? So, like, if you're standing on a street corner with 3 or more people, and the cop just decides to be a dick, you could go to jail for 15 years.
Pretty much, if he can collude with the magistrate that sentenced you. Yeah.
And I know that people would say, well, when it goes to court, they would find out that the cop was wrong. Maybe, if they didn't, depending on the color of your skin and whether or not they needed their local prison filled to a certain capacity.
Well, that's right. 9 jails built here in the last 24 months, just another coincidence. But we've also got the G20 summit in November, so they'll have it well and truly in place by the time that turns up. So everything will look nice and peachy down under when all these thugs come here for their annual meeting.
Ugh, when's the G20 in Australia?
November, I do believe. I think it's November.
Ugh.
So it gives them time to get all the kinks worked out. But I mean, that just reminds me of, Maoism, Nazism, fascism, and all the things that we are fighting to stop. Who wants to live under that? Not I.
Yeah, so, not me either, dude. Ugh. And
I'll be here until they take me away.
Right? And they look, again, they're pushing Australian-style gun control legislation here. You know, they're bringing the former prime minister over here. They're pushing the same type of legislation. It's only common sense type legislations to keep everybody safe. You just heard from an Australian on the ground telling you it's all lies. To look into the event itself, which led up to it. That's shady. Educate yourself, ladies and gentlemen. Do not depend on the state to do it for you, because they certainly will not do a good job. The solutions to our problems are most definitely an inside job. We love you all, and we are out of here.
Keep